The midterms, they're coming. And the worst possible thing a Democrat could do is insinuate the blue wave will be fueled, at least in part, by undocumented immigrants. I could not believe it when I heard this. Obviously, it's going around in conservative circles. There is a widespread belief among many on the right that illegal immigrants voting is a widespread problem. Look, I always say this, the truth is closer to the middle. When the left says it's not a problem at all, I'm like, I'm not sure I'm going to trust you. When the right says it's a huge problem, I say, I'm not sure I'm going to trust you. It's probably in the middle. There probably is an issue with many illegal immigrants who do end up voting somehow, but I don't think it's probably as bad as many people on the right believe it to be, or as much of a non-issue as the left believes it to be. One thing that's always been really strange to me is opposition to voter ID. I've always been a liberal. I voted Democrat years ago. I'm not a big voter, by the way. But like 10 years ago, me and my little hipster liberal buddies in Chicago were like, we're going to vote for Obama or whatever. Here's the thing. When I first heard the argument saying you need an ID to vote, I was like, and? I need an ID to go to the movies. Like, I assumed it was a normal thing you needed an ID to vote. And there's this really great video from Ami Horowitz, I think his name is, where a bunch of young Berkeley college students claim that voter ID is racist. Because, and then they make a bunch of disparaging remarks about black people saying they don't have the internet or something. And then he actually goes to this neighborhood and he talks to black people and they're like, we all have IDs. And I'm like, who doesn't have an ID? But in reality, there is. It's not so cut and dry. There is an issue with voter ID laws and Native Americans, and I'll get to that. But first, let's take a look at what is this all about, a blue wave of undocumented voters. Georgia's Secretary of State Brian Kemp, who is now running for governor, won his primary by doing his best imitation of Donald Trump. Kemp's hopes for winning the State House took a serious hit when his Democratic opponent, they took a hit, Stacey Abrams seized on the fact that up to 53,000 voter registration applications were put on hold due to the state's exact match requirement. Yes, indeed. Okay. The law requires voting applications to match with other existing government documents, such as driver's licenses, social security records, as a check against fraud. But like voter ID laws, exact match has been denounced as having a disproportionate impact on African Americans. And as Secretary of State, Kemp himself is charged with enforcing the law. As a result, Abrams saw an opening to allege not just racism, but the use of Kemp's own office to tilt the election in his favor. Regarding the racism charge, Kemp could argue that he was just following a law that, beyond simply being the law, is a common sense precaution in protecting the integrity of the vote. But the seeming conflict of interest was a blow to the Republican in what has turned out to be a highly competitive race in a red state that is, thanks to demographic changes, trending purple. Oh man. But Kemp's problems were ameliorated. What a great word, ameliorated. If not solved, when Abrams was taped giving a speech last week during a joint appearance with Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren in Jonesboro. In an expansive prediction of how Democrats would sweep the country with a blue wave, Abrams said the following. I hope you're ready for this one. The thing of it is that blue waves aren't blue. The blue wave is African American. It's white, it's Latino, it's Asian, Pacific Islander. It's disabled. It is differently abled. It is LGBTQ, it is law enforcement, it is veteran. It is made up of those who have been told they are not worthy of being here. It is comprised of those who are documented and undocumented. It was comprised of those who have been told they're successful and those who have been left behind. She literally said this blue wave, which is an insinuation that Democrats are going to rise up to elect new congresspeople for the House, and said undocumented. That's a reference to people who are not legal citizens, and she's saying they're going to play a role. That was probably a big mistake to do when you're trying to criticize someone for voter ID laws. Perhaps Abrams was just on automatic pilot, signaling her loyalty to identity politics and expressing solidarity with every possible segment of the electorate. There is nothing unusual about Democrats vowing to protect the undocumented. But saying that a blue wave of Democrats will include documented and undocumented voters, as if those two categories were just two different ethnic groups with equal rights to the ballot, was astounding. Abrams later said she didn't mean for anyone who is not legally allowed to vote in the state of Georgia to be allowed to vote. But read literally, her statement in fact implied that the distinction between documented and undocumented is meaningless when it comes to turning out the Democratic base. Abrams' words seems to illustrate the classic definition of a political gaffe, when you get caught saying exactly what you mean but didn't want to state it publicly. No, She's not part of a plot to drag illegal immigrants to the polls in order to swing elections to the Democrats. It's also unlikely that most of those living in the shadows would be willing to vote illegally, since doing so could expose them to being caught and deported. But she did highlight the fact that Democrats oppose any regulation that might prevent cheating at the polls, whether by illegal immigrants or anyone else. Their focus on voter suppression is, despite the fervent support it receives from the mainstream media, merely a talking point to brand Republicans as racist. Polls have consistently shown that a majority of Americans of all races generally support voting integrity laws, and it is no more difficult for minorities to register legally than it is for anyone else. In fact, in New Jersey, I just found out, apparently you register when you get your license. They ask you, like, you want to register? It's like the same time. I didn't even know I was registered, and I don't know if I'm going to vote or not. So I was like, I better check to see if I'm registered. Maybe I have to go, and I was, simply because I got my license in New Jersey. I'm registered in New Jersey, and relatively easy. So here's the other thing I want to point out. If there are people who don't have IDs in this country, I'm curious as to how they get jobs. Right? I guess in some circumstances you can work without an ID, for sure, but you need identifying documents to work in this country. And it's strange to me that there's an implication that people would not have that. Again, I do have a story I'll show in just a second where Native Americans are being impacted by this. Abrams' slip is a clear break for Kemp, who had struggled in the polls after winning the Republican nomination and has assumed only a slim lead over Abrams this month. For Abrams, it may be the tipping point. Running on her left-wing beliefs rather than moving to the center could undo her hopes of becoming the first African-American woman to be a U.S. governor. Her comments may go down as a lesson for Democrats about how language viewed as normal on the left can play right into the hands of Republicans. She hasn't just taken the focus off Kemp's enforcement of the law. She hasn't merely given the lie to the Democrats' preferred narrative about racist voting laws. Abrams has made Kemp's stand in behalf of voter integrity look entirely sensible. In another video, I showed an article from The Economist where out of 78 primaries, progressives lost 71. They barely won any. And people keep telling the Democrats to go further left, and all you're doing is splitting your base. A moderate Democrat does not want to vote for a far left socialist. They don't. They're much closer to a Republican than they are to a socialist. And the more the Democrats try and pull left, all they're doing is ensuring the moderates will bow out or vote Republican, because Republicans make more sense. They don't get it. They don't get it at all. Here's the thing. In my opinion, I really don't care about voter ID laws. Like, it makes sense. Like, it's strange to me that you need an ID to buy booze. You need an ID to go into a bar. You need an ID, all right? If you want to have a job in many circumstances, you need an ID. You want to go to the movies, you need an ID, right? Like R-rated movies, you literally have to prove your age. Usually they'll just say, I can tell you're older than 18 or whatever, they'll let you in. But I've been carded at the movies before. I can't remember what movie I saw. It wasn't even that long, a couple of years ago. They said they had to card everybody. Again, I can't remember what it was, or if it was in New York or something. But check this out. Voter ID laws can actually have an impact, right? So this is a story from NPR. Many Native IDs won't be accepted at North Dakota polling places. Native American groups in North Dakota are scrambling to help members acquire new addresses and new IDs in the few weeks remaining before Election Day, the only way that some residents will be able to vote. This week, the Supreme Court declined to overturn North Dakota's controversial voter ID law, which requires residents to show identification with a current street address. A P.O. box does not qualify. Here's where I think things get a little bit more nuanced, a little more complicated. Sometimes people have IDs, they don't update them. Sometimes people are in a circumstance where they can't have an ID. It's very difficult to get an ID when you're homeless, for instance, right? What do you put for your address? What is your ID going to say? And I believe there have been circumstances to alleviate this by issuing IDs without addresses on them. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it is interesting that you do need to have your own physical address in most circumstances. That can actually restrict someone. In my opinion, just because you don't have a home or a place to live doesn't mean you should be disqualified from voting. I believe it used to be the case in this country, you had to be a landowner. So maybe that's where it derives from. Many Native American reservations, however, do not use physical street addresses. Native Americans are also overrepresented in the homeless population, according to the Urban Institute. As a result, Native residents often use P.O. boxes for their mailing addresses and may rely on tribal identification that doesn't list an address. Those IDs used to be accepted at polling places, including in this year's primary election, but will not be valid for the general election. and that decision became final less than a month before Election Day after years of confusing court battles and alterations to the requirements. I'm not going to imply they changed any of this on purpose, I don't know. But I do want to point out nuance in all things. I personally don't really I don't believe the Democrats when they say voter ID is racist. I don't. And just because we have this instance of Native Americans who will be negative impacted, which I think we should definitely make sure these people have their voice heard for sure, I don't think it's a big enough issue. It's like, should people in this country have an ID to vote? I believe they should. Should we make sure that some people who have trouble getting an ID have help doing so they can vote? Absolutely 100%. But does this instance mean we should just say no voter ID, like no one needs an ID anywhere, anytime? No, that literally makes no sense. Why wouldn't you need an ID to vote? I just don't get it. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I just don't get it. But I'll say this. If I don't get it, it's just because the Democrats haven't laid their case out in a concise and understandable way. Plain and simple. I see this. And I feel for the people who are struggling, who want to vote, and these laws changed. And I think maybe we should have a rule saying that, any kind of voter law shouldn't be changed within a certain time frame to guarantee people have the time to do what they need to do. Changing the laws a month before the general election, that's ridiculous. That's wrong, okay? But telling people you need an ID to vote, in my opinion, is just basic. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think. Thanks for hanging out. I might have some more videos later today if I'm feeling up to it, because I got a couple more stories I think that are really interesting. But other than that, I guess I'll just see you all tomorrow.